Alrighty, get this party started. Hello and welcome to the Geek on My Sleeve channel, where we do weekly book reviews, excuse me, and live book discussions every
Sunday. For those of you new to the channel, I'm Peter, and in the top left-hand corner is Carl, and we have a returning veteran to our Geek Out and some of our spoiler-free reviews, Dr. Natasha Arora, to discuss StarSight, Book 2 in the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. Before we get into the book discussion, how's everybody doing today?
So far, so good.
Yeah, I'm excited to geek out over this book, but yeah, it's been a long week. Looking forward to just relaxing, exploring the Skyward series, and visiting with some of our favorite characters. But yeah, how about you, Pete? How you doing?
Pretty good. It's been quite an adjustment for current times, but progress. So pretty good all in all.
Yeah, adjusting to the new norm.
Yeah.
So yeah, book 2 in the Skyward series, StarSight. For those of you new to the Geek Out streams, we pretty much stick to a loose outline of the book and series, and then just geek out, go down the rabbit hole, and just play in this space. And we've done a Geek Out stream for the first book, which was a lot of fun, and Natasha was there for.
With mushroom ice cream.
With mushroom ice cream, yes. We were talking a bit about food before the stream. So, yes, might go down the rabbit hole there too. What was it we were talking about? Jorgen and the bread scene.
Yes.
First off, spoiler warning, we will be going in detail over the book. If you have not read the book, feel free to abort and return on the archived adventures of the Geek Outs, of which then you can comment below. If you have read the book and or don't mind spoilers, feel free to stick with us here and comment in the live. Sorry.
Yes.
So, disclaimer, bread scene with Jorgen.
We could start there. But yeah, spoilers ahead. Want to try to stick somewhat chronological because I feel to truly appreciate where we are at the end of book 2, you really got to go back to where Spensa is at the beginning of book 1. Mm-hmm. It opens up with, was it the prologue scene of she's a young girl with her father, and it's like this big epic battle, right?
Yeah.
And and he pretty much gets branded a coward, and just watching her development through book 1 into book 2. Yeah, what were some of the big things that you guys remember from book 1?
I remember her unique way of phrasing things. Everything was in the shape of a battle, and
yes,
well, that actually reminds me of a couple people I knew from way back when.
Yeah.
So that was one unique thing, which it's been interesting to see how she developed through the 2 books. And then Brandon Sanderson put a very nice juxtaposition with one of the other characters in the second book. And that's kind of what reminded me of exactly that scene that you mentioned from the first book. I was like, wow.
It really does, show the progress with the contrast there, and I definitely want to explore that a little bit later. But in the first book, she's pretty much talking about drinking the blood of her enemies or something like that, and just like this very old heroic speech mannerisms. And you get into book 2, and pretty much she goes behind enemy lines, right, and has to use her social skills and not get discovered. And yeah.
Which she also developed a lot on the social skill side between book 1 and book 2, because at the beginning of book 1 she was like living in these caves by herself and like with her mom and her grandma a little bit, but mostly on her own. And so like, especially right now, I think we can all appreciate what happens when you're on your own, right, for too long.
Yes.
And then even at the beginning of book 2, she's jumping in a prominent position, she has confidence, she's just bulldozing through all the challenges in front of her, and it's incredible to see that growth.
Yes. And she's still very much Spensa in her own way.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, she's come so far, and when you start book 2, you really get a good grasp for that. And yeah, the scaling there, starting out in the caves to the universe gets so much bigger in StarSight.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, real quick here. Natasha from Cliff, you got a welcome back.
Oh, thanks, Cliff.
Yep. So for me, even though she develops so much, I really like the Kipson general guy, where he's supposed to be a poet, but he ends up kind of filling that void of the, dining on the flesh of the enemies feel.
That's
but
true.
It's a little bit more well done. So if that's something that you enjoyed from the first book, you got a flavor of it in the second one, but it was in a different light. So I enjoyed that he kept that in there.
Yeah. And Spensa has a couple of those moments as well, I think, in the second book, but not nearly as many.
Yeah.
She, again, I felt like she started to acknowledge some of her shortcomings in the second book, which allowed her to grow a bit too. She's like, this is not my specialty. Early on in the second book, before Alanique comes to their area, they're pretty much trying to come up with this mission to go behind enemy lines, and Cobb asks her like, hey, can you do this? And I think the last book she may have been like more gung-ho, where here she's like, she acknowledged it wasn't her strength. So,
which is funny because it comes up towards the end of the book too, where it's I forget the name of the other character, but some other character was kind of needing to go under some disguise. She's like, I don't know how to do this. I haven't trained in espionage and spying. She's like, me neither, but I've been here. And it's at the end of the book, and it's like this revelation of, well, just because you didn't train on it doesn't mean you don't know how to do it.
Yeah, and that is a huge theme from the book, and I don't have it pulled up right now, but like the moment she connects with Gran, as she's kind of figuring out her powers, and something along the lines of like, a hero doesn't choose
her battles.
Yeah.
That's true in life too. Like, none of us choose our battles. Like right now, none of us chose to deal with this COVID-19 and quarantine, but yet we are all here facing this battle together, but alone, which is kind of like what she was doing, right? She had, her whole planet and people supporting her, but in the end, she was literally on her own, especially after she had to, part from Mbot, and then she was just literally all on her own.
The feels with Mbot.
So many.
But yeah, the exact quote is, a hero does not choose her trials. She steps into the darkness, then she faces what comes next. Just really speaks to Brandon Sanderson. There's so much I just enjoy his writing so much. Said it before, fanboy.
Yeah, and I
real
think
quick, want to thank everyone for showing up. If you could please hit the like button, that really helps us out. And feel free to speak up in the comments or the chat if you disagree with some of our assessments. Very interested to hear your guys' thoughts on these. Yeah, there's just so many good themes and points in this story that we almost need multiple Geek Out streams for. Sorry. Cut you off, Pete.
So, kind of along the lines of what you guys were saying for how much Spencer develops, it reminds me a lot of the way Mistborn does, because Brandon has this writing style where he gives you enough information to kind of guide your opinion. So, you know, you didn't like the Krell and you thought the Earth, or not Earth, but the humans were being suppressed and, you know, they're in jail. But as we start off on the second one, as soon as she transports over to StarSight, and you know, within the first interaction there, it turns out that the Earthlings have, or not Earthlings, the humans have tried to take over the galaxy 3 times now. So they've already called the Delvers, and that was their last big calamity. And so, you know, maybe we have been that bad, and it just kind of flips your perspective. And then just throughout the whole thing, you know, she's trying to stay rigid to her, oh, the Krell are evil. Oh, you know, these are the people we're battling. These are our enemies. And then you have the scene with the water where it's just a bunch of kids, you know, playing and doing whatever. And she's just, you see her walls break down more and more until, you know, when we get to the end of it all, and she's pretty much got to decide between her home planet and StarSight, where, you know, she's made several friends. She pulls it out of thin air and saves them both.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So many good points there. Something
Carl,
I really,
if you
go
don't
ahead.
mind, if I jump in, towards the end, as you mentioned, Pete, that she called them friends, which caught me a little off guard when I read it. I was like, wait, I mean, I knew that she like cared about them, but choosing to use that word really drove the point home, which I appreciated, because I don't know, it's a thing where you can let your imagination go, but only if you choose to, right? But then if you use a certain word like friends, like, okay, well, that's more defined.
Yes.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't a black and white. It was a slow progression. You know, she was in that situation training them initially, and so she kind of stepped up in that role. And then there was just, each time they interacted, there was more and more development to their friendship. And then, you know, when it came down to the final battle there.
And Brandon Sanderson did a good job showing that throughout the story, right? We got a lot of those interactions with her and the different members of her new flight, and watching those relationships build. And then, the back and forth as she starts to realize. I think of the moment when she's talking to Cobb at the very end, where she says, you know, hey, Cobb, they're people with lives and loves too, you know, just ordinary people. He's kind of like, who'd you think we were fighting? You know, like, they're not big red-eyed monsters. And
it's a great student teacher moment right there.
Yeah. Between Cobb and Gran for Spencer, going from that little girl that was hunting rats in the caves and sleeping underground in a spaceship, like she
Came a long way.
Came a long way. Something else that you brought up, Pete, that I really appreciated on the reread with this was, if Brandon shows you something, you need to be paying attention, right? Like there were several big WTF moments towards the end of this book that we want to get into, but if you go back and you look at it, there was that foreshadowing there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah.
So I guess along the same line of just, Spence's character development and, the aliens and the humans development, it all brings it back to then when she is dealing with the eyes or the what do they call them?
The Delvers.
Yeah, the Delvers. When she actually does deal with them, she has the revelation of it's all a matter of perspective. Because if they, it kind of goes back to other sci-fi books for me. Typically they'll do like 1 through 10 numerical, and then depending on how it comes back, if it's a repeat or if it's in reverse or if it's the next sequential numbers, and that's kind of what's happening there, where she saw herself in that first, when they decode the message from the satellite, and she's seeing herself, and then it's very much every time she goes into that space, she starts getting the Delver's feelings, where she, is tired of hearing all this noise and squashing the insects and thinks of them as bugs, and she gets a bit of that perspective. And then not until like that final battle where she realizes, hey, this is just a different perspective, and they're feeding off of the raw emotions that we're giving them. And so she switches it up, and she, sends them her emotions and what each of those little blips are, and each of those, they're real people, and just like the whole revelation there.
That part reminded me a little bit in a really like different genre kind of way, of The Big Friendly Giant, where it's this thought that they're all big and scary, but there's one friendly one. And so it was like, I don't know, kind of that different dynamic, and like you said, Pete, with the perspective and the perception of what the others are and what they're like, and of how they're viewing you or how you're viewing them.
Yeah. That was a big part of this book where, Spencer was constantly questioning that. So for her development there, we've talked about it before on this channel. That's one of the many great benefits of reading, is just seeing or experiencing the empathy through the character's eyes and walking in their shoes, and how many things you can pull away and compare it to everyday situations.
Yeah, very, very true. And that's where, for me, it was Mistborn, because they have this whole like, oh, they're evil. Oh, we've gotta fix it. And this kind of started off the same way, but in a completely different realm. And then the fact of it's all a matter of perspective, and just, oh man, the cliffhangers at the end of this. I'm not saying I have any intel or that I know what's going to happen, but for me, I feel like Spence's going to be like in charge of everything, and she's going to be like the mediary between StarSight and I can't remember the satellite thing where the humans are.
I could see that happening from how we left it and how things built.
Yes.
Especially when at the end, like if you think about just how people kind of go through regular life and get promotions and do things, right? Like you have a job, you take a gamble, the bigger the gamble, the bigger the payoff. She took 2 or 3 stupidly big gambles in this book, right? And they all paid off.
Okay.
Well, the ones I'm thinking of.
Yeah, she had a couple smaller ones, I guess, that didn't, but all the big ones, she accomplished a lot. Yeah.
Well, especially like through the eyes of the people on her planet and the people in charge, all those gambles paid off. So it would be reasonable for the next step for her to be like something bigger, especially since she has these connections that nobody else has.
Yes. And then some. She is so young at this point. And this book, we also got to see a lot of the potential with her powers of the Cytonics, and just look at how much more control she has there. And they even kind of like teased at it a bit where I think she was talking to Murmur, where they were talking about reproduction, and they believed that all the bipedals or whatnot with a similar anatomy had a common ancestry, but their Cytonics took them to other areas. And then just seeing everything with Braid and the potential there with the Delvers. And yeah.
So many speculation feels for the way this ended up. And
it could go a lot.
I don't know if that's necessarily where we should be at for right now, but okay. So another great character
off the beaten path a little bit
is Mbot. And so since he changed his primary or his pilot, that started the background process or whatever that he can't replicate in all the different parameters. And so for most of it, he's just kind of hitting a wall, and anytime he thinks about it, he's just not able to. And he's able to, create the drone, or he's able to upload into the drone.
His offspring, right?
And
pretty much.
All that plays out, and there are so many times where she's doing this espionage thing, and she's like, "Oh, I got found out. Oh, this," and it's it's never quite the full picture.
Wait.
And anyway,
can't go that you can't touch on Mbot and then go a different direction. There's so much there with Mbot.
And Mbot slowly figures out his code and gets into the drone, space, and then she leaves. Like, she takes a gambit and she talks to Braid about that she's a human and there's a nice place for her, and that just completely backfires, and she's just got to bounce right then and there, leaves Mbot, and oh man, you don't see it until she comes back, and the little snippet where he is in the drone and he rewrote his code line by line, having to stop each time. And it's kind of like the way he persevered, because, I guess, for example, for positive or negative reinforcement for like a dog, they do something good, you give them a treat. They do something negative, you swat them on the nose, or you do the negative reinforcement. And so he gets through that, and he's able to completely rewrite his code. And then right at the end, where he's all like sluggish, and then as soon as the other dimension or the nowhere portal opened us up, and he accelerates, and everything they've been worried about, and why they don't do AIs and all the Delvers, and oh man, so much. Anyway,
slow down.
Tag.
So many good points that I want to touch on with all that. Where do you want to begin, Tasha?
Well, maybe my favorite part of the whole book.
Yeah, go for it.
So the first book, I'm racking my brain the whole time, like, mushrooms. What?
Why the obsession?
Like, what? Obviously, this is going to be like something later, right? And I was so happy that he didn't make me wait until book 3 to find out what the mushrooms were about. And I was like, well, this is a very odd, like, it just doesn't fit, and then it being in the place around where like others like Doom Slug would be, and that being the key to the transportation. I was just like, wow, that was so, I mean, maybe it wasn't like left field, but I felt like it was, just because it didn't like fit. It was like that missing piece of a puzzle that you're certain is in the wrong box, but then you figure out where it goes. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
Hey, Natasha.
You're talking about the Doom Slug revelation, right?
Is your headphone plugged all the way in? I'm getting a little bit of feedback.
Yes, it is. It might be my heater that just kicked on because it's cold over here in Boston. I know it's the end of April everywhere in the world, but Boston doesn't know that.
Okay, that's fine.
Fun times, all good.
Yeah.
Yep. The Doom Slug revelation was one of those moments that I was thinking of where once we got there, so many things kind of fell into place, right?
Yeah.
The mushroom obsession, the piece about it where just like how dangerous they were and the control factor there. And wow.
Yeah, I'm also curious to see in the third book what happens now that there's this directive of, well, let's go try to find more.
Right.
And does Mbot have some information that might be helpful? And did he copy that?
And did he unlock it? Right.
Yeah.
Because so much for this book, like Mbot and his progression, we get a lot of the hints about how his technology was forbidden, how we see through StarSight some of his technology is more advanced than theirs currently is. And he's ancient, right? Like I think it was a couple hundred years he'd been on Spence's home planet, and to be that much more advanced, and there's these safeguards in place, and Spencer and Mbot talk about it, and even Mbot is kind of concerned. He's like, you should be more concerned. If they're here, there must be a reason why my manufacturers don't want me to be able to do this, right? And there's so much there that I feel is worth talking about. We get to see his kid who's born without a personality and just follows instructions and algorithms, where Mbot isn't able to fire guns. And that's one of the safety precaution. His offspring, when she says start shooting, right? So there's that there. And then
it's that history repeating itself element that might play out in the third book a bit more.
Which potentially has played out several times before, because there's been 3 times humans tried to conquer the galaxy. And I'm really curious about Mbot towards the end, which we touched on, because if he copies himself, is he still him? And I think there was some connection between like Mbot and AIs and how they anger the Delvers, right? So it makes you wonder how much of him could potentially be over there in the information. In addition to when he copied himself, what was he able to truly rewrite? Because the first half of the book, he was clicking and shutting down every other scene or a couple times a scene, right?
Yeah. Which is also a very like human quality, right? When you're like up against something that you just can't do, and you take a nap, or you clean your apartment or house, or you stress bake, or you take the dog out, or whatever it is, like, I don't know. It was interesting to see those human elements show up now and again.
Yes.
And for me, like, there was so much buildup and so much understanding with like all the rules that they have, and the ending kind of ticked me off, but kind of just explodes into everything that could be, because we know how we can accidentally summon a Delver, but now that Spencer has had that revelation of there is a means to connect and communicate with them, she's gotten through to them. They were more or less appalled that they were killing and snuffing out life, and that's why they went back to their realm. And kind of same thing with Mbot. Like, he copied himself, but he also pulled out and rewrote all those hindrances, or all those things that he couldn't do, or that he wasn't supposed to do, such as copying himself, such as flying himself, all of that. So all of those are gone, which now brings us to why we're afraid of them, why we shouldn't be doing the Delver thing. But we also just sent Spencer and Mbot as our emissaries into the nothingness, into the void, where maybe we have one one Delver who will listen and understand where we're at. But everything we built up where, the humans are trapped. At the end, it's like, oh, after talking to Cobb, he was real passionate about getting the ship back, this, that, and the other. So it's like, okay, there's still going to be political struggles, battles, or it's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows, but I don't think we're on the extinction list anymore. And then we figured out how to communicate via cytonics with the Delvers. And then Mbot, just pulled off all of his imperatives. So maybe he's going to be the next evil villain, and then in the third one. But we just also, I hope not as well. But it's just like Brandon all coming Sanderson together because what's the guy's name? Jorgen. Jorgen just found a horde of doom slugs, or whatever they're actually called. And the fact that, Spensa is a cytonic and she's been praised, or she was the savior, before it was, the cytonics were a traitor and they were using ways to manipulate us. And granted, we haven't since Spensa's lost Mbot and now can be mentally influenced due to all that. And we get to see more and more of that in the second one as she's doing her training and as she's, doing every time that she gets introduced to the eyes, it's impacting her a lot more because she doesn't have Mbot. But now that Jorgen, who has been hiding the fact that he is cytonic, and, that we get a little hint or snippet about all the other possible cytonics up there when they view the recording. Like, I see just like cytonics blowing up and everybody has it, training of the powers, doom slugs all over the place, and then into the other void. I don't know. I built it all up and then I broke it all down. A lot of potential.
So many good points in that rant, Pete.
I wanted to ask a question that came out of that about Mbot. So what do you guys think is the reason or something that might come out in the third book as to why he was able to overcome all those safeguards in his code? Because he kept trying and trying, right? And in the first book, it was like, well, I can't do this, I can't do that. And the second book is like, well, let me I can't. Okay, I'm back, right?
Yeah.
But what changed? Like what? If he's a machine, right? Like how did that happen?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers there, and that's something that I've been thinking about too. And first of all, Spensa is Spensa, right? And her influence with Mbot, she was constantly challenging these safeguards in place all through the first book, a lot through the second book. But the big part was when he was able to rewrite her as his pilot, right? And I wonder if like that gives them like a certain level of admin privilege maybe, or how that all works. But she kept like at the very
like finding
end,
the back door, maybe like that was the opening of the door.
Maybe. And he seems to have a lot of corruption issues with like his memory, right? Like it's pretty spotty.
Like not knowing why he was chasing mushrooms.
Yeah, he doesn't know that, but he could tell you the history behind Skin of Your Teeth, right? Or play these symphony pieces or whatnot. But yeah, it's really interesting. And I there's a lot of potential there with the whole AI bit, and there's a lot of history there about there's a reason why they don't do it. And I'm really curious about the relation with the nowhere space and the Delvers, like how much of them is a program, or he's constantly trying to prove that he's something, right? Not just an AI.
Or so I guess backtrack a bit. When Mbot was made, there was a lot more structure. So part of it, I think, why he was able to succeed or be what he is now is due to the AI, growing and developing, but then also the fact that it's kind of like StarSight, where they control the information that gets out, they control the media, they tell you what to do. They've got their cytonic inhibitors in place. They've got a monopoly on it. So the structure from when he was made probably was a lot more strict. And then due to being an AI and having parts of him damaged due to time before he got restored, I feel that was the opener. And then after that, it's I gotta wait until 3.
Technology's so advanced too, right? And
you're
right. They imply he's a lot older in this book because when they saw some of the stealth gear on his bot that he made, they were talking about technology from the Figment partnership or alliance with the humans or whatnot, like ancient technology. So I also wonder how much of it's that just with how old he is.
Yeah,
and quality high-tech gear.
My understanding is with the whole Delver incident and all the restrictions for communication and restrictions for technology, it was essentially or the equivalent of us now being put back into the Stone Age. Yeah, they have hyperdrives and giant star civilizations, but they had so much more with the stealth technology and all this extra stuff. And then I don't know which war did it, because more and more happened, and they just keep getting pushed further and further back where they're just trying to survive.
There's that ties into another interesting point about the book that I wanted to get your guys' feedback on. But I think it was Kuna that made the comment about being in the Stone Age, and then nearly 100 years later, just how quick the humans have progressed and developed. It's kind of intimidating. And Spencer's like, well, like just call it a draw, right? But one of the big themes is just the human aggression and the aggression from other species, and just kind of like the importance of it. And the different cultures.
Yeah, the different cultures was interesting. That's not something that I would have guessed from the first book would have been such a prevalent theme in the second book, but it was nice to have like a different kind of social element to it. It was a surprise for me to have such a diversity.
I agree. You don't see it a lot in my limited experience with young adult. You don't see it a lot in young adult, where it's just kind of like us versus them. And he spends a good part of the book kind of exploring that.
One of my favorite aspects of the different species that were there was Vapor. Was that her name? Where you couldn't see her. And I thought that was really interesting to play like other ways of knowing that somebody's around, or different ways that you interact with people in like a sci-fi kind of way. And obviously it's different than like we do with a virtual screen and everything, but it's similar in that you're missing a sense, right? Like,
right.
And I think that's one thing that, a lot of us can relate to right now. Like, we're missing this in person. Like, it's hard to say exactly what it is, because, like, I can see you just as well as I can see you if you were here, but, like, is different, right? So being able to smell and hear but not see is really
it's an interesting concept, and it's nice to make the reader kind of stop and think about that. And I think it's so well done and ties into some of the larger themes of, again, the us versus them, Mbot, like, am I a person? Am I me? What is like individual or primary intelligence or secondary intelligence? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of themes I would not have expected in a young adult sci-fi book, but are awesome that they're there. And as we've talked about before, it's nice to have as a conversation starter when you have conversations like this about a book. It brings in a lot of different elements.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. A lot of good stuff in this book, and we want to do it justice, but we just keep going down so many different rabbit holes here.
Yeah.
Good,
it's been a lot of speculation.
And there's a lot, and just so much I enjoy about this book. A lot of the characters we fall in love with in the first book, they have much smaller roles, with the exception of Spensa, Mbot, and Doom Slug. Excuse me. But even the little bits we do get, I really enjoyed the interludes where we spent time with Jorgen, which I don't know if we mentioned it. I guess him and Spensa took their relationship to the next level. They had their first kiss before she flew off into the sunset to go to StarSight.
I thought that was a pretty nice role reversal for most books. I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, hey.
Yeah. It
kind of gave me that Hey Arnold vibe.
Oh yeah. Hey, there's a throwback right there.
Yeah.
But it's nice, and that's one of the reasons why I find myself gifting or recommending this book so often to other young adults, because it's nice to see different characters, different people in that main character role. But yeah.
Well, and okay, I guess between Spensa and Jorgen, like throughout book one, Jorgen is kind of the rock, and Spensa is developing and trying to figure things out, and Jorgen really guides Spensa. But this one, it was the opposite. It was Spensa who, made a plan, executed, was elsewhere, and Jorgen is like, okay, I've been hiding this power, but I need to utilize it. I need to express it. There's obviously something there. And, he has to feel with Alanik, and he can feel that connection. He was able to see the eyes in the recording. He, is able to, spend time with, grandma.
There's a lot there that I really want to get into. And yeah, you brought up a couple good points. I feel like they both have developed and kind of had to pull things from each other, right? Spensa seemed a little bit more grounded in the second book, but Gran was literally kind of like trying to push him to not just respond to orders, right? Like expand his thinking, clear his head as he's kneading the dough. And I thought it was interesting to hear the contrast from Gran on when she trained Spensa to do it versus Jorgen. And I feel that back and forth, we got to learn a lot more about both of them. And yeah, again, with non-traditional story tropes like Gran, as far as like the mentor isn't necessarily the traditional one you would see as well, but she's just so much fun. And yeah, I really enjoyed watching Gran kind of poke at Jorgen, and then all of a sudden talk about how finally get some good kneading out of him, and just the writing. I felt like I was in the room there with the two of them.
Yeah, no, that was a really good section. And again, it was one that would just caught me off guard a little bit because it didn't quite fit perfectly. So I'm curious to see if that doesn't grow into something more in the third book.
Right.
But yeah, one of the things you said made me think too that from the first book, we talked about Spensa, but Jorgen was very rigid. It was like, we're doing it this way and that's it. We're by the book. That's, and from what, was described of his upbringing, I think a lot of us can relate to that or know somebody that grew up in that kind of environment. And to see him kind of exploring where the boundaries are and which rules, he was like, well, maybe if we just like this. And, you know, even Spencer, before she flew off, called him over to convince her not to do something crazy because he was that rigid, you know, rule follower. And he was very quick to say, nope, you should go. She's like, wait, you're supposed to tell me no. That's not how this works.
Right.
And then we also had Cobb influence that a lot because Jorgen was like, oh, I may have to break another rule. And he's just like, I don't know, half of them anyway. Yeah. And then, you know, he just talks about, Jorgen says something explaining his powers. And Cobb's like, oh, I've got someone you need to meet. And he's like, oh, it's a psychiatrist, isn't it? You think I'm crazy? And he's like, no, it's someone who bakes very nice pies. You know, and he's got a bond with Gran too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and it parallels what a lot of mentees end up going through is they grow and mature. You start off your relationship with your mentor in one way, and it's very much a teaching, you're learning, you're absorbing, you don't question too much. They keep certain things hidden because, you know, it needs to be black and white while you're learning. And then it just explodes into, well, the whole world is gray. And actually, there's this whole closet full of stuff that I didn't want to share with you. Yes. And I think we started to see a little bit of that from both Cobb and Gran, which is pretty interesting. And I'm curious to see what's next.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yes, just the scaling on so many fronts across 2 books. We could speculate all day about what's going to happen in the 3rd book and just so many different directions we could go. Yeah. Let's see. Couple other big interesting things from StarSight. We touched a little bit about some of the politics there with the different alien species and
I guess the way we left that off was kind of tenuous because initially when Spencer comes back, saves them from the Delver, wakes up in the infirmary, she's having the conversation with a Dione, I want to say. I'm sorry?
Kuna.
And it seems as if, you know, Kuna's talked to Cobb. There's some good potential. He seemed very reasonable, whatever. And then the next thing you know, Spencer's like, this doesn't seem right. And then you get, I want to say Blade, but that's not right.
Braid.
You get Braid showing up and using an RPG on freaking civilian vehicle. And the way, the Krell guy... Sorry, names escape me.
Oh, Winzik.
Yeah, the way Winzik just is still trying to control everything and spin it and, make it look like it was her all along and just... it's very much the fear-mongering mentality. So now what used to be our biggest ally who has talked to Cobb, who is going to be able to set a foundation, is... wearing a different skin, so to speak, and is fleeing for her life. Meanwhile, our main, person who can port back and forth and can talk to everyone and has some presence is off in the nowhere world with this AI who, it's just, it looked like it could have gone better. But yeah, a lot of politicking and... Yeah.
That was one part of the book for me that went really fast. Like, in terms of how quickly stuff was disclosed for the rest of the book, I felt like this was a very different pace, which maybe is just how much was going on or how many threads from other pieces were coming together so quick. But I almost wish it was like, hold on, I might need to read that again because I may have missed something important that I'm going to want to know later.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've noticed for myself, we said in the spoiler-free review, you don't like to reread books so much, so you made it through once. I noticed, like you said, rereading or just like the second or third time I go through a book, so much more clicks into place, right?
Yeah.
Because there's just so much going on and happening. And, kind of like we said before, that's life, right?
Yeah.
Spensa has a lot of challenges as she just spur of the moment goes and tries to infiltrate this alien race. And the politics there, and yeah.
What's the name of the Kipson, the little dog person who creates the outlandish titles, the river that runs upstream?
Hesho.
I am disappointed that he died off. He kind of filled that angsty, over-the-top void for me in this book because Spencer was trying to keep it together. And in relation to him, I'm curious to see where all of their verbiage, teleporty people.
Oh yeah.
What is Spencer's? I'm curious to see where all the Kipson cytonics went because it talks about them being involved with the humans, and then the Kipson, being afraid of cytonics, and they're like, oh, okay, bye, and then Hesha hints at, hey, if this doesn't work out, come to our homeland, and we have some documentation or recordings of how these cytonics use their abilities. So that's something I thought I'd get more of out of this book, because it hinted at when Alanik crash landed, hey, I was going there to learn more about my powers, and we learn a little bit just from the Unshielded not being an Mbot vibes, where she gets a lot of the impressions from the Delvers, and we learn a little bit about how apparently when we doom Slug around, we get impressions of the locations, but she doesn't get a better understanding.
It teases at the potential. I feel like her powers have grown a lot in this book. And along the lines of Hesho and his people, her flight group is all races that dealt with the humans before, and there's just a lot of potential there in the future if now I'm the one with brain farts on names. If Winzik does seize power of the superiority, I wonder if that will cause an additional split. And here goes the fourth time of humans trying to conquer the galaxy. But yeah, and then I think it's the Kitsin is the name of the species. But yeah.
And just how the I'm two people yet I'm not a person ends up being the one to save the day, which I really wanted it to be the other lead Kipson, because I enjoyed his mentality. It reminded me a lot of Spencer book 1 with the verbiage, and they were kind of conspiratorially talking about things. Sorry, words.
You're good.
And man, when he died, I was so sad. But yeah, anyway, the Dione, I want to say.
Yeah, the Dione murmur.
The Dione of two people coming through and saving the day, when I for sure thought it was going to be the Kipson. That was a turning point for their society to allow some aggression, which the Kroll leader guy that we dislike, who is manipulating everything, has already kind of figured that out, so we need some more to combat it.
I want to visit on, I think it was Murmur. Did you have some thoughts there, Tasha?
Oh yeah, just the Dione character I think filled another void where in the first book Spence and Mbot had this relationship of questioning a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this book they had already kind of figured out their dynamic and they were on the same team and they were just going after the goal. And obviously Mbot had his own challenges, but that was mostly internal. It wasn't this questioning, whereas with the Dione it brought in that questioning of very basic things like, how were you born? Are you okay with this? How do you reconcile these two sets of experiences in your brain? Just like trying to explore what other facets of life could be in a sci-fi way, of course, but I thought it nicely filled that. And then when that character kind of saved the day at the end, that was another surprise moment for me. I mean, there's probably foreshadowing and all that, but I was like, whoa, that is a great idea.
Yeah, it was one of the other interludes, which again was just so amazing. Murmurs there, because just like you said, seeing life through his eyes, he's pretty much everything that she feared in the first book, right? The Krell, and here she is experiencing and seeing things through their eyes and realizing that, okay, yeah, like it's completely different, but you still fight beside me and train beside me and just another person. And Spencer brought up some good points during that dialogue as well. The random card and just like shaking up their personalities again. Brandon Sanderson just did a great job kind of explaining the biology and how that all works with the species throughout the book.
Also, we could easily talk about like world creation in this one, which we haven't touched on, because like the first book, yeah, there were the caverns and all that, but it wasn't like too otherworldly. And in this one, even when she, whatever the verb is for jumping through space to the other the place where the Krell are, like that didn't seem all that different. And when they were describing the hospital scene towards the end where she was recovering, like it seemed like a regular place. But then when they were talking about kind of maneuvering through, what was it, through the Delver or whatever that space was, when they were like going through like the maze and stuff, and it was meant to confuse, and then somebody came in, right, this Dione came in and it had so much clarity on it. It's like, wow, that's quite a like a world building trick right there, to like build a house of mirrors from like seemingly normal stuff and then just like cut through it so cleanly. I was very impressed.
Yeah. So as we've said before, and I really want to explore this further, Peter and I are huge Brandon Sanderson's fan and have read a lot of his stuff. And world building is certainly something worth exploring and hearing more of your opinions on, because you haven't read a whole lot of his work, right?
These are my only books of his that I've read. So, and
something I was trying to ask myself and want to get Peter's thoughts on is, there are a lot of things in these books that I notice I give Brandon the benefit of the doubt on, because I've read so much of his works and the scaling and everything, where other authors I might get a little bit frustrated at. But yeah, like sorry, Pete, what's your thoughts on world building?
So for this one, there was kind of like Natasha was saying, there wasn't a whole lot of world building. It was more of a emotional and or like a sense building, because you emotionally wanted the humans to survive and thrive, and then you emotionally thought, well, just kidding, they're like everybody else. And then you just got this overwhelming emotion of like, oh, these gnats, from the Delver perspective, oh, these gnats, they don't know anything. And for me, there wasn't a whole lot of world. The only world that we really detailed or developed was the space scene, and how all book one, we're talking about flying inside atmosphere, and then we get that blip of, hey, it's not the same. All my fancy moves are commonplace here. And then we get the whole Delver maze and then the actual Delver incident. But, just like each one of the alien species, one being a smell, one being a test breeding mashup conglomeration, one being, as much as they're each individual things. Kind of like the Krell have their robot bodies that they inhabit, and the Kipson have their horde. And, we see it in other sci-fis where, due to them being an underground species, they like to congregate and have hive mind mentalities. But anyway, so much of the building for this was emotional. And yeah, as far as the world goes, like, it was so much of don't do this, don't do that, don't, use radio traffic, don't build AIs, don't,
That's part of the world building, though. And while maybe, you went a different direction than I thought, I think you're a little bit more critical of your buddy Brandon.
Well, but in contrast to some of the other epic worlds that he's built, where I agree. I felt like
this is young adult for one, and I think he did an incredible job on the world building. Yeah, it's not super heavy on a lot of the stuff I think you're talking about with some of his other works that are 40 plus hours, where this is 14 hours. But we go from such a small world of understanding the human's mentality in book one to book two, now going behind enemy lines and expanding on the quote magic system with cytonics a lot more. Not a whole lot, just hinting at it. The whole other aspect of the alien species and all that there. Understanding the Delvers and kind of why there are these legends and these cautionary tales. And then,
sorry, go ahead. Carl, just to add, I wonder if there isn't some intentional lack of world building in that the alien world seems very home-like, right? Mm-hmm. Like in terms of similarities. And then at the end, you're introduced more to this foreign world being the Delvers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
I wonder if it's not like
semi-intentional.
Mm-hmm. Because it plays in with the other themes that we've talked about already.
Yeah. And I feel while being there, he showed instead of told a lot of stuff too, mm-hmm. right? With some of the moments with Murmur, with the political strife, with what we see through her joining the Space Force, and experiencing the culture, the aggression, no aggression, mentalities. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a different way of communicating the differences in the worlds by mm-hmm. showing instead of describing what it's like.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's that balance between developing what we're doing and the mm-hmm. story. Like there was a lot of big developments throughout the book, but for me, it wasn't so much world. And for this one, it just kept hinting at things. It hinted at, Alanik's home planet. It hinted at the Kipson mm-hmm. world and how they had prior cytonics, and it just, yeah. And then we've got the whole nowhere space where they mine the acclivity stone from, and mm-hmm. where the Delvers are, and just all this extra.
There's a lot more they can explore and do in the space, right? You're right. They hinted at a lot of stuff and potential, and we spent most of our time on StarSight in this book. Yeah.
I tend to appreciate having holes in books somewhere, though, because to me, books, unlike movies, allow your imagination to fill that hole. And so while this one is like an obviously large hole, I appreciate some amount of missing detail to, you know, a certain extent, because books that dive way too far in, it doesn't give my imagination a room to play, right? And I feel like if I wanted that, I would just watch a movie.
Yeah, and that's something Brandon just does an amazing job about. He ties it all together in such a way that it gives you enough information to kind of give you a bias while describing the situation. And then he just keeps sprinkling in details or events that happen that just, you know, kind of shift or warp, you know, what he's already built. And yeah, he ties it all together well. As much as I said there's not a whole lot of world building, it's because it didn't need it, you know. I was invested in Spencer, and, you know, I enjoyed everything she had going on, and just the, you know, I guess Mulan vibe of I'm gonna go undercover, I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna pull something out of thin air and save the day, and yeah.
She did. And boy, what a ride. She did a lot of things well, but she was still very much human, believable character, as she had some of those fumbles along the way. And there are a lot of moments where, thank goodness for Mbot, because she just did something very one track. And he's like, don't you think that would look suspicious? Why don't we try this instead?
You definitely got to see the learning curve of like trying to go undercover with no forethought or training. You know, obviously at the beginning it's like, oh, how do I do this? Am I gonna smell the same? And then towards the end, it didn't even come up. You know, she just kind of rolled with it.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing that Brandon did really well on, in my opinion, because towards the beginning, where we've got Raj and he's redesigning Mbot's hologram to look like a Krell fighter ship. And so that's their initial plan. And we're like, okay, that sounds good. You know, play the video, get an insight into the Delvers, triggering the Cytonic powers, some other Cytonics seeing it, and just like, you know, a little string that then connects it all. And Alanit coming down, and now, you know, here's this separate plan that, you know, literally fell from the sky and landed in your lap, and it's like, okay, we'll do that. And then it takes the Kipsons, and with whatever his epic title of a ship is, and he essentially explains that they tried it. You know, they coordinated stealing 3 ships at once with hyperdrives, which is, you know, is exactly what we were about to do. And Brandon didn't have to go down that line because they already did it. You know, they showed that they had tried it and things failed, you know, and that's why they lost their citizenship and this extra. And yeah, just the way it all brought it back and tied it together.
And it was easy to follow, right? Because he sprinkled it into the narrative through the dialogue, through kind of that bonding experience with Hesho. And yeah, just does it so well. We talked a bit about a couple different members of her new flight. Let's go down the rabbit hole a little bit with Braid, because she also was a very show instead of tell moment, with just a lot of different pieces to living with the Krell, quote unquote, for so long, and just kind of like her mannerisms that she picked up. She was raised with her parents, I think, until 5 or 7.
6 or 7. Oh.
Yeah. So like some of her expressions were very human, but as like Spence is trying to read the different alien body language, just kind of some of the pieces that Braid's picked up, as well as you really get to see how she views herself through the different brain fart superiorities society of just how aggressive humans are, right?
Honestly, I didn't like the character, but at the same time, she was playing dumb, in my opinion. Like her mannerisms and everything, it was essentially of, someone who's been beat down all their life, and that's all they know that they are. They know that they're the scum of the earth, and I didn't enjoy it. And it wasn't until she fires that rocket launcher at that civilian transport towards the end that it really like all came together. There are a couple hints before there where she was like, oh, Murmur or Mortimer or the Krell guy. Winzik. Oh, that okay, wrong name. Anyway, Winzik.
Mortimer's part of her flight.
Or that's the Dion, right?
One. Yeah, and okay. So is Winzik. Anyway. He's the one that is Braid's sponsor.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Because they have to be permitted.
Winzik or Braid keeps, hinting that Winzik, there's so much more there and he's amazing. And even though he gives this or she gives this vibe of, oh, I'm just a human. Oh, I'm just aggressive. Then she goes on the flip side and she's like, oh, Winzik is, great. And he knew more than we knew about our own power, our own potential and it's, I don't know. So I didn't care for it, but I'm excited to see what some of the other human captivity locations end up being.
Yeah, that tease there, but just to clarify, you feel like she was kind of just playing a role that Winzik set her up for with the flight?
Yeah,
she was
very
trying
much
to play up the fear of the human piece a bit.
I didn't feel we got her true nature. We got a lot of the, I'm just a human. I'm gonna, be aggressive. I'm gonna snap out. And Winzik utilizes that to further his own goals. So due to Braid, people trying to get pictures with them after they successfully go through the Delver Mage and fire off the weapon, Braid's just like, oh, you don't want a picture with me. You shouldn't want this, blah, 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 and plays it up as if, oh, even though this tame one is aggressive, and then it just furthers his goals for, oh, they're escaping, oh, they're getting out, oh, we need to do more. It's very much the kind of like, names of people and thing. Alanique's sponsor, which I really liked, the way she says, oh, if you look at the feeds, the humans are always just about to escape. They only use it when they need extra funding or when they need extra this. So
play it up.
I could see Braid having the epiphany down the line and being an asset, but I could also see shoving Braid out an airlock because I feel like she's just so fake.
Peter's pretty passionate there. What do you think about the story arc, Tasha, between Braid and Spensa?
I thought of it a little bit differently. I think it didn't bug me much at all. It was just kind of like another character. It's like, oh, whatever. Mm-hmm. But from this conversation, I'm thinking now that maybe it's like if the characters are like the rest of us, right? Which I assume that's kind of where inspiration for these characters comes from. Right. That maybe Braid is like Spensa early on in the first book, where she thought she was a coward because she was the daughter of a coward, and she was just acting from all the input she got from those around her. And Braid has this input of, oh, you're like this and you're like this, which makes her an easy puppet, right? But then if Spensa's still like interacting later in book 3, then I could see how maybe with like that positive influence, kind of like Cobb was that positive influence for Spensa, maybe there's an opportunity for a shift.
I guess that's true. between book 1 and 2, it's all about, character development and growing, and yeah.
I think I agree with a lot of that there, and I do see the similarities, and I do think we get a lot of that contrast with Braid and Spencer on that development piece. But I do see that with her as far as like she's very used to all the other aliens just brushing her off as being human. So part of that's just playing it off as just, oh, I'm just a human, let me just whatever play it up. And then also Winzik pushing his own agenda. And we do get some of that clarity towards the end there with Braid trying to play Spencer a little bit and the RPG on the civilian ship. Yeah. Any other big moments you guys feel like from book 2? We talked about the Doom Slug revelation. Talked about the Delvers. We know so much more about that space now. Mbot and the AIs. We went down that rabbit hole. I think there's a lot more there to explore in future books.
I wonder what they're gonna find with Mbot since they're like trying to put him back together, right? Because they haven't really explored Mbot, right? Because Spence was always so protective.
There's a lot of questions there that I have at the end of this book, where I felt like as a whole we kind of wrapped up a lot of good story arcs in this. There's just so much more, and I think Mbot is a huge component of that for me because he pretty much copied himself into another machine, but it's not exactly him, right? And then there's just so much there with this in between space.
I take back what I said at the beginning about Spencer being the new intermediary, and I am sorry I have not listened to Mistborn in a while. I apologize, but whatever the individual is who clamps on those different metal things to get like the index of knowledge and essentially becomes the god.
Censored?
I can't remember, and I'm so sorry.
Anyway, don't want to do spoilers.
I believe Mbot can be that because we see that little glimpse of he's like sluggish and in the new body. And then as soon as the nowhere portal opens, as soon as the, whatever, he's moving at faster speeds. Plus, he now has taken out the code to impede him and his imperatives that he can't do things. He's going to be the new god. Like we're gonna be all about mushrooms, doom slugs. We're gonna,
Are we gonna replay these predictions before we talk about the third book?
Yes.
Because that's gonna be at the top of the list.
Mbot is going to be the new mushroom god, and we pay tribute in fungus. That is one of our predictions for book 3. You heard it here at Geek on My Sleeve. What else you guys got? There's so much with this book.
How can we top that, Carl?
That's yep. Very good point. This has been a blast, everyone. Geeking out over StarSight, book 2 of the Skyward series. All hail our new mushroom overlord, Mbot. Thank you for joining us once again, Natasha.
That was my pleasure.
Peter, yes. Always a pleasure to have you. Final thoughts, ladies and gents, on this book?
Awesome. Definitely read it. Even if you didn't read the first one, it's okay.
I don't know. I like the character growth between both, but it's definitely up there.
It's definitely better to read both, but there's so many people that are like, oh, I can't read that because I didn't read the first book. And then it just turns into like this big ordeal, and it's just a book.
True.
Just pick it up. It's good. Read it.
And you know what? We're working on including more summary recaps on our channel. So give us enough time. We might have a Skyward one up for you where you could just watch that and then hop into this book and get everything you need right there. So, yeah. On that note, Pete.
So Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern, and or when you joined us for this one a week from now. Trying to do it every Sunday as long as it makes sense. We are going to be doing the first book of Artemis Fowl by I don't remember. Or do you remember the author?
We were debating the name. E-I or E-O-I-N Colfer.
Oh yeah, the E doesn't. It's like Owen Colfer.
Owen Colfer.
Anyway, Artemis Fowl, right. Owen Colfer. Sunday, book 8 p.m. Eastern. Book 1 in hype to Disney buying the rights and doing a movie on. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you much, everyone, for joining us. Looking forward to geeking out with you guys here soon.
Bye.
By pushing buttons.